No one in the luxurious restaurant that night could have imagined how quickly everything would unravel. A billionaire CEO, a group of 6 determined men, and a quiet black waitress with a secret no one expected. All of them would collide in a story that would test the meaning of money, power, and humanity itself. Before we dive deeper into this story, hit the like button and subscribe now. Here you'll find emotional, life-changing stories that will keep you inspired every single time. Julian Hartwell was a man people recognized instantly. His sharp jawline, tailored navy suit, and the aura of confidence that came from owning a fortune worth billions made him impossible to ignore. For years, newspapers described him as ruthless. Business magazines called him the shark who never sleeps. To his rivals, he was untouchable. To his employees, he was distant, almost cold. And yet, on this particular evening, his life was about to depend on someone society rarely noticed. Someone who carried trays instead of contracts, and hope instead of wealth. The restaurant glowed with chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses. Guests whispered about investments, art collections, and fortunes, while sipping $1,000 wine. And there was Julian, seated at the center table, speaking quietly on his phone about another merger. Nothing about him suggested vulnerability. Money was his shield, richness his armor. But then they appeared. 6 men. They didn't storm in. They walked in calmly, like customers. Their movements were synchronized, their eyes sharp. They weren't after food. Their focus was Julian Hartwell, the millionaire CEO whose empire had destroyed competitors and created enemies. Whispers rippled through the room. Who were they? Why were they watching him so intently? Among the waitstaff was Amara. At first glance, she was simply a black waitress in her mid-30s, balancing trays with practiced ease. She wore the same uniform as the others, white blouse, navy apron, but something about her presence was different. While others rushed nervously to please the wealthy diners, Amara moved with quiet grace, her eyes sharp, as if she noticed everything. And she had noticed them. The 6 men. The way their glances met and separated. The way one of them touched his wrist, signaling something to the others. She froze for a fraction of a second, then forced herself to keep moving. She couldn't draw attention. Not yet. Julian didn't notice her. He never did. To him, waitresses were invisible. He was too busy talking about fortune and expansion, about markets and shareholders. But Amara's heart raced as she delivered water to the table behind him. She could feel the weight of what was about to happen. The men began shifting, slowly surrounding the dining area like chess pieces closing in on a king. The room grew quieter, though no one quite understood why. Something was about to erupt. The rich guests, who lived for drama in tabloids, leaned in with curiosity. Amara set down a glass and whispered to herself, "Not here. Not now." But deep inside, she knew she couldn't stay silent. She knew exactly what they were planning, though no one could have guessed how she knew. Her secret had nothing to do with money or status. It wasn't written in contracts or hidden in bank accounts. It was something buried deep inside her past, something that, if revealed, could shatter the image she had carefully built as a simple waitress. And then it happened. One of the men rose from his chair and gave the slightest nod. That was the signal. Julian looked up, finally noticing the unusual stillness in the room. His gray eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, he felt something he hated: uncertainty. The 6 men began to move as one. The guests gasped. Glasses clinked. Attention you could cut with a knife filled the golden-lit hall. And in that instant, Amara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, directed straight at Julian Hartwell. "Stay exactly where you are. Trust me." No one could understand why she said it. Not Julian. Not the 6 men. Not the stunned guests. But everything was about to change. Julian froze. Those were not words he was used to hearing from a waitress. "Trust me." He almost laughed at the absurdity. He had built an empire worth billions by trusting no one. Fortune had taught him that loyalty was as fragile as glass. And yet, something in Amara's tone carried a weight he couldn't dismiss. The 6 men paused for a fraction of a second, their plan interrupted. They glanced at one another, confused by the authority in her voice. Who was this woman, daring to step into the middle of a storm? Amara set her tray down on the nearest table, her hand steady though her pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to stay invisible. But she couldn't. Not this time. She took a breath and whispered again, only loud enough for Julian to hear. They're not here for your money. They want you. Julian's jaw tightened. His life had been built on power plays and high-stakes negotiations, but nothing had prepared him for this. If they didn't want money, then what could they want from him? Revenge? A confession? His empire had created countless enemies, competitors who lost fortunes, employees discarded like broken pieces. Perhaps tonight, those ghosts had come back. The guests shifted nervously, their whispers echoing like a wave through the grand hall. Phones appeared, eager to record whatever was unfolding. But the maitre d', sensing disaster, tried to step in. "Gentlemen, if there's an issue, sit down," one of the men snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. The maitre d' obeyed instantly. Julian's eyes flicked to Amara, annoyed yet strangely drawn to her calmness. "Who are you?" he hissed under his breath. "Someone who knows more than you think," she replied softly. The leader of the six, a tall man with piercing dark eyes, stepped forward. His suit was simple but neat, his movements too precise for an ordinary guest. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, his voice controlled. "We finally meet." Julian leaned back in his chair, masking his unease with arrogance. "If this is about money, take it up with my lawyers." The man smirked. "Lawyers can't buy back what you've destroyed." The words sliced through the air. Guests gasped again, clinging to every word like it was theater. But this wasn't theater. This was real. Amara studied the men, her sharp eyes following their subtle signals. She knew exactly what they were doing. She recognized the discipline in their movements. And she realized that if she didn't act soon, the entire room could spiral into chaos. She stepped closer to Julian's table, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "If you don't trust me now, you won't survive this night." Julian glared at her. "Why should I?" Her response was steady. "Because I've seen men like them before. And I know what comes next." For the first time, Julian noticed something in her eyes. Not fear. Not panic. Something deeper. Experience. As if she had lived through a life far removed from serving drinks to rich clients. The six men began spreading out again, forming a circle around Julian's table. Their leader's voice grew firmer. "We didn't come for your fortune. We came for truth." Truth. Julian muttered, narrowing his eyes. He hated riddles. He dealt in numbers, contracts, deals, not vague threats. "Yes," the leader replied. "And tonight, you're going to give it to us." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Every guest was frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The chandeliers shimmered above them, casting golden light on a billionaire who, for the first time, didn't feel in control. And then, Amara leaned slightly toward Julian, her whisper sharp and urgent, "Don't answer him. Not yet. There's something you need to know about me." Julian's pulse quickened. The six men closed in. The crowd held its breath. And Amara's secret, the one she had buried for years, was seconds away from colliding with Julian's carefully built world of power and richness. Julian's eyes burned into Amara's. The billionaire CEO, who had built walls of steel around himself, suddenly found those walls cracking under the weight of a waitress's words. "Something you need to know about me." What could she possibly mean? The six men waited, their leader's gaze steady, patient, almost amused. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. They knew time was on their side. Amara straightened, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "Julian," she said quietly, her tone carrying an authority that made him flinch, "this isn't the first time I've seen men like them. Years ago, I lived in a world where power and money weren't shields, they were weapons. I walked away from it, but I never forgot." Julian frowned. "You expect me to believe that a waitress knows more than I do about my enemies?" Amara didn't blink. "I don't expect you to believe me. I expect you to listen. Because the wrong word tonight could cost you everything, not just your fortune, but something even you can't buy back." The guests leaned closer, their champagne glasses forgotten. The restaurant had transformed into a stage of whispered confessions and dangerous truths. The leader of the six men chuckled. "Interesting. Seems the billionaire isn't the only one hiding secrets at this table." He turned his gaze on Amara. "And you're not who you pretend to be, are you?" For a moment, Amara's breath caught. Memories flashed. Dark rooms, coded words, people she once trusted turning their backs on her. She swallowed hard. This wasn't the place to spill everything. But if she didn't say enough, Julian wouldn't understand why his next move mattered so much. She leaned closer to him, her voice almost a whisper. I once worked in a world of intelligence. Not law enforcement, not exactly. But I was trained to read people, to notice patterns others missed. I left that life because it nearly destroyed me. Tonight, it seems that past has found me again. Julian blinked, stunned. He couldn't imagine her carrying a different life. She looked so ordinary in her uniform, invisible in the way only staff in rich spaces often were. Yet her words carried the weight of someone who had seen things no billionaire boardroom could replicate. Why here? Why now? He asked, his voice tight. Because, Amara whispered, your enemies aren't just after truth. They're after exposure. And once it's out, all the money in the world won't save you. The leader tilted his head, studying them with quiet curiosity. Go on, Waitress. Tell him what you really are. It'll make tonight more entertaining. The room pulsed with silence. Even the chandeliers seemed to tremble with the tension. Julian's arrogance wavered, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. He was a man who thrived in contracts and numbers, but this was different. Here, money meant nothing. Richness couldn't shield him. His empire couldn't rewrite the story about to unfold. He muttered, almost to himself, if what you're saying is true, then they know everything. Amara nodded, her voice low but fierce. And that's why you can't answer their questions. Not yet. Let me guide this, or you'll lose more than your fortune. You'll lose yourself. The leader's voice cut through like a blade. Time's up, Hartwell. We want answers. Julian's mouth opened, but Amara pressed her hand lightly against the table, her eyes locking with his. Don't, she whispered, her tone filled with urgency. For the first time in his life, Julian Hartwell, the billionaire CEO who trusted no one, was forced to decide whether to place his fate in the hands of a woman he barely knew. The 6 men stepped closer. The air grew heavier. The guests held their breath. And Julian, against every instinct, did what few people expected. He stayed silent. The leader's lips curled into a smile when Julian remained silent. So, he said softly, almost with satisfaction, the mighty billionaire finally hesitates. Interesting. His eyes swept the room, making sure every guest was watching. You've built an empire worth billions, Hartwell. You crushed competitors, left families in ruins, and piled up fortune on top of fortune. But tonight isn't about money. Tonight is about truth. A murmur rippled through the wealthy audience. The name Hartwell carried weight. Investors, politicians, and celebrities knew it well. To hear it challenged so boldly in public was unthinkable. Julian's jaw clenched, his pride warring with fear. If you think you can humiliate me in front of all these people, you're mistaken. The leader's smirk widened. Humiliate? No, Mr. Hartwell. We're here to expose. To make you face what you've hidden. Amara felt the room tilt toward chaos. If the men forced Julian into speaking, if his secret spilled uncontrolled, everything could spiral. She stepped closer, her presence calm but commanding. You want truth, she said, her voice clear enough to reach them all. Then let's do this the right way. All eyes turned to her. The waitress. The woman they had ignored all evening. Suddenly, she was the center of the storm. The leader raised an eyebrow. And who gave you authority here? I did, Amara replied without hesitation. Her voice carried a sharpness that silenced even the guests' whispers. Because if you wanted chaos, you would have created it already. But you came here with rules. That means you want control. And control requires order. Let me keep this from turning into something none of you can handle. The 6 men exchanged glances. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone in a waitress's uniform. But there was something in her tone, measured, unshaken, that made them hesitate. Julian stared at her, a mix of irritation and reluctant respect. He wasn't accustomed to being defended. He was accustomed to buying defense. Yet here was a woman who stood in front of him with no thought of money, no trace of fear. Fine, the leader said at last. Speak, waitress. But remember, We're not here for games." Amara nodded, taking a breath. "Then start with why. Why him? Why now? If you want truth, reveal yours first." The leader's smile faded, replaced by a hardened expression. He took a step forward, his voice low but cutting. Because his empire wasn't built on brilliance alone. It was built on silence, on the voices he ignored, the lives he destroyed. People lost their homes, their families, their futures because of his so-called success. And we are the remnants of those decisions. Gasps filled the restaurant. For the first time, Julian's mask cracked. His gray eyes darted across the men's faces, searching for recognition. And slowly, one by one, the fragments of memory returned. Deals he had dismissed as trivial, companies he had swallowed whole, workers laid off in the thousands. "You're saying," Julian muttered, his voice faltering, "you're saying you're here because of business?" "No," the leader shot back. "We're here because of what business did to us. Money was your weapon. Fortune was your shield. And we are the ones who lived in the ruins of your empire." The words struck harder than Julian expected. For a man who defined himself by numbers, for once, numbers weren't enough to explain away the human cost. The guests looked at Julian with new eyes. Whispers of heartless, ruthless, monster floated in the air. His fortune, once admired, now seemed like blood-stained treasure. And yet, Amara didn't move away from him. Instead, she spoke firmly, "Blame, anger, loss, those are truths. But the full truth is never one-sided. If you came for answers, then let them be spoken fairly." Her voice carried across the golden hall, echoing with calm power. For the first time that evening, it wasn't the billionaire, nor the 6 men, but the black waitress who controlled the room. And just when the tension seemed unbearable, the leader leaned in, his words like fire, "Then let's begin with his daughter." The entire restaurant fell silent. Julian's face went pale. And Amara's breath caught. Julian's face drained of color at the sound of those words. His daughter. The guests, who moments earlier whispered about mergers and fortunes, now sat frozen. They weren't expecting this. They came for fine dining, but now they were watching a billionaire's life unravel in real time. Julian's lips tightened. "Leave my daughter out of this," he said, his voice sharper than glass. The leader shook his head. "She's already part of it, Hartwell. Everything you've built, every decision you've made, has led not only to your fortune, but to her suffering." Whispers rippled across the tables. The rich loved gossip, but this was heavier than anything they'd heard before. A child? Suffering? No amount of money or richness could erase the weight of those words. Julian's fingers curled into fists under the table. He hated this feeling. Vulnerability. Exposure. His empire had trained him to believe that emotions were weaknesses, and yet here he was, cornered in front of strangers, his most personal wound placed on display. And then, unexpectedly, Amara spoke. Her voice was gentle, almost protective. "Don't use an innocent child to fight your battles." The leader's eyes flicked to her. "You think she's innocent? She carries his name. His fortune will one day be hers. And with it, the stain of everything he's done." Julian rose slightly, his chair scraping the floor. His tone cracked with rare anger. "My daughter is sick. She lives in a wheelchair. And she's the only reason He stopped, as if he had said too much. Gasps spread through the room like fire. The image of the untouchable billionaire suddenly fractured. The man of money and power now stood revealed as a father, desperate and raw. Amara's chest tightened. She had heard rumors, whispers among the staff about Julian's little girl, Lily, fragile and bright, hidden from the public eye. But hearing it from Julian's own lips shifted something inside her. Behind the ruthless CEO was a man quietly fighting a battle no amount of fortune could win. The leader didn't flinch. "Yes. The child. The one you protect with money, while you destroy others with it. The world deserves to know who you truly are." Julian's voice dropped, bitter and tired. "You think I haven't paid enough? Every day I watch her struggle, and every day I'd give away my entire empire if it meant she could walk again. But money can't buy that. Richness can't heal her." The room stilled. For the first time, the guests saw not a billionaire titan, but a father aching with helplessness. Amara's hands trembled, but not from fear. From recognition. Because in that moment, She knew why fate had placed her here tonight. She wasn't just a witness. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who carried knowledge that could change everything. Her secret wasn't just about her past and intelligence, or the life she had run from. It was about Lily. Amara glanced at Julian, her voice soft but certain. Your daughter, she doesn't need more money. She needs something else. Something you can't imagine right now. Julian turned sharply toward her, eyes blazing with questions. What do you know about my daughter? The leader smirked, watching with amusement. Yes, waitress. Tell him. Tell him how you fit into his carefully guarded world. The crowd leaned forward, the tension unbearable. Amara took a deep breath. For years she had buried the truth, telling herself it was safer that way. But tonight, surrounded by fortune, secrets, and broken lives, she could no longer keep it hidden. She looked directly into Julian's storm-gray eyes and whispered, I know about Lily, because once, I was part of the team that tried to save her. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, disbelief. Julian froze, his world spinning. And the 6 men, for the first time, looked shaken. Julian's entire body went rigid. What did you just say? His voice cracked, not with anger this time, but with something far rarer for him, desperation. Amara held his gaze, steady but pained. Years ago, when Lily's condition first worsened, your family quietly sought help that money alone couldn't buy. I was part of a specialized team. Not doctors, strategists. We were tasked with finding treatments, breakthroughs, even experimental paths that might restore her health. Gasps filled the room. Guests leaned forward, their jewels glittering, their curiosity burning. A waitress tied to the billionaire's most guarded secret? The scandal was irresistible. Julian's hands trembled against the table. That's impossible. I kept everything about Lily locked down. No one knew, not even half my board. I wasn't supposed to know, Amara admitted, her voice low. But I did. I was inside those circles, the hidden ones that worked quietly, unseen. I walked away when I realized your empire was using money to force outcomes, ignoring lives it damaged in the process. But Lily, her voice softened. I never forgot her. The leader of the 6 men slammed his palm lightly on the table, drawing every eye back to him. See, Hartwell? Even your secrets bleed. Even those you tried to bury come crawling back. But Julian wasn't listening to the leader anymore. His gray eyes locked onto Amara, searching her face, his breathing uneven. You were there? Amara nodded, a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. I watched your daughter smile at people she barely knew. I saw her courage while the world around her focused only on your fortune. She wasn't just a patient. She was a light in a room full of shadows. For a moment, Julian's mask of arrogance broke entirely. His voice dropped to a whisper. Lily, she remembers you? Amara hesitated. The truth pressed heavy on her chest. She used to. She called me the lady with the kind eyes. The room fell silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim under the weight of the moment. Julian's world shifted. For years, he had seen Lily as his only fragile treasure, hidden away from the greed and cruelty of the world. To hear that this woman, this waitress, was once part of Lily's journey cracked him open in ways he couldn't explain. But before he could speak, the leader's voice cut sharply through the stillness. Enough of this sentiment. The truth we came for is not about your daughter's innocence. It's about the fortune you built while families like ours suffered. He gestured to the other 5 men, who nodded grimly. We lost homes, careers, even loved ones. And you, Hartwell, climbed higher. That's why tonight matters. Because the world must see that even a billionaire's fortune cannot silence those he crushed. Amara stepped forward, blocking Julian with a quiet strength that startled even him. No. You want revenge. You want him broken in front of cameras and strangers. But truth isn't found in humiliation, it's found in accountability. If you destroy him now, you destroy Lily too. Her words hit harder than anyone expected. The leader's eyes narrowed. And why should we care about his child when he didn't care about ours? Amara's voice cracked, but it didn't falter. Because compassion isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it. And Lily, she needs her father alive, not shattered. The guests whispered furiously, torn between scandal and sympathy. Julian looked at Amara, torn between suspicion and a fragile thread of trust. Why are you doing this? Why protect me, after what you know? Her eyes glistened, though her voice stayed strong. Because once, I promised a little girl I'd never let her fight alone. Julian's chest tightened. His fortune, his empire, his richness, all of it seemed hollow in that moment. The only thing that mattered was the truth staring back at him through Amara's eyes. The leader sneered, unimpressed. Pretty words. But promises don't erase the ruins he left behind. And with that, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small envelope, thick, worn, and dangerous. He dropped it on Julian's table with a thud. Inside this, the leader said, his voice cold, is the truth you've buried for years. Tonight, everyone will see it. Julian stared at the envelope, his breath shallow. Amara's heart pounded. Because she knew exactly what was inside. And if it was opened, Julian's empire would collapse, taking Lily with it. Julian's hands trembled as he stared at the envelope. Gold lettering on his leather-bound chair reflected in the soft chandelier light, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The 6 men, tense and watchful, expected him to rip it open, expecting confrontation, scandal, or confession. Amara stepped closer, her presence steady and commanding. Don't let anger or fear decide for you, she whispered. Whatever is in that envelope, it doesn't define who you are. Your choices now do. Julian swallowed hard. He had spent decades measuring every move by money, richness, and power. And yet, for the first time, he realized that none of it truly mattered. Not against the fragile life of a child, not against the morality he had long ignored. He looked around at the guests, who were holding their breath, expecting drama. And then at the 6 men, who had come to expose, judge, and perhaps even destroy. And finally, at Amara, whose calm courage had quietly anchored him amidst a storm he couldn't have anticipated. With deliberate hands, he pushed the envelope toward the center of the table, not to open it, but to set it aside. Some truths, he said, his voice resonant and measured, are meant to teach, not punish. The leader's jaw tightened. You'll leave it closed? After everything? Julian shook his head. Yes. Because revenge doesn't heal wounds. It only spreads them. You wanted exposure. But I want understanding. You lost because of me, yes, but I am willing to make it right. That is the only truth worth sharing tonight. Gasps and whispers filled the golden hall. Guests couldn't comprehend a billionaire choosing restraint over scandal, compassion over public vindication. The 6 men looked skeptical, but Amara's eyes glimmered with approval. I'll do more than apologize, Julian continued. I will invest in the communities affected, rebuild the lives harmed by my actions, and most importantly, I will spend my fortune and my time ensuring my daughter, Lily, grows up learning that kindness and courage outweigh wealth and power. The leader hesitated, then slowly nodded. He and his companions exchanged looks of disbelief and finally, cautious respect. Some grudges are not easily dissolved, but tonight, a seed of hope had been planted. Julian's shoulders relaxed for the first time that evening. He turned to Amara, his voice softer, almost tender. You saved more than me tonight. You reminded me what matters. You reminded me that wealth is meaningless without heart. Amara smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and pride. And you reminded me, she said, that even people who appear lost in fortune can still choose to do the right thing. It's never too late. The guests, sensing the tension shift into something profound, murmured in awe. Phones were lowered. Cameras forgotten. The restaurant had transformed from a stage of confrontation into a quiet testament to compassion, courage, and human connection. Julian exhaled, looking toward the ceiling, and allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. Lily will grow up knowing she is loved, not because of money, not because of fortune, but because she matters. And I will never forget the lesson of tonight. Amara nodded. She will. And so will the world, in its own way. The 6 men, though still wary, began to step back, understanding that this night would not end in destruction. Instead, it had evolved into a lesson, that power can be tempered with empathy, and that even those who seem unreachable can be guided by courage and heart. Julian glanced at the unopened envelope one last time. He didn't need it. He didn't need proof. The real truth, the one that mattered, was alive in the choices he made from this moment forward. As the restaurant lights softened, Julian rose, walking over to Amara. He extended his hand, not as a billionaire to a waitress, but as one human being to another. "Thank you," he said simply. Amara took it, her grip firm and warm. "No thanks needed. You just needed to remember." Outside, the city lights glimmered like stars against the night sky. Inside, a billionaire and a once invisible waitress had rewritten the story, not of wealth, not of ruin, but of hope, redemption, and the quiet power of compassion. And as Julian looked at his empire, his daughter, and the people whose lives he had touched and will continue to touch, he realized something profound. Money builds empires, but love and courage build legacies. And some legacies, he knew, are worth more than all the fortune in the world. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, share this video and tell us in the comments, what part of this journey moved you the most? Here's another story waiting for you, and I'm sure it will change the way you see the world. Thank you for watching. See you soon.